morning, Stephen. How are
Hello,
you?
Michelle. Doing pretty well, and yourself?
Doing pretty well. Welcome to my living room today.
Nice living room.
So, I was actually kicked out of my office, which is in the basement, because my son's bedroom is right next to it, and he pulled an all-nighter. And he said, "Really? Do you need to do your show right next to my bedroom? I need to sleep." So, I had to haul all my
So
gear.
what, he works in one of those 24-hour convenience stores?
Yeah. No, he's in his last year of medical study, so he will be a doctor
Oh,
next year. So I'm very grateful. I'll have my own
wow.
live-in doctor. How good is
Yeah, that's a nice thing to have for sure. So you need and you have two sons and a daughter?
Yes, yes.
So you need a doctor, a lawyer, and a programmer. And then you can take over the world. You can own
Then
the
we can
world.
take over the world. Absolutely.
Well, I think are you the piano player?
Actually, we all play the piano. I'm not very good. My sons are really good, actually. Yeah.
Wow, you sound like a very talented family. Well, that's great. Glad to have you via your dining room. So,
Here we
folks,
go. But that's
sorry
not
about
why folks have joined, right? They want to hear about dirty data.
who cares about that. Yeah. So thanks for coming back. We skipped a week. We're on a bi-weekly schedule, in part because I've gotten really busy with a new project for the Apex community. We're going to be announcing on Monday, October 11th. So look forward to that. Hopefully you'll participate. Not going to sneak any details out there, but I think you'll be impressed and excited. So I've been writing code, and it's really cool, actually. Michelle, for a long time I've suggested that database developers have been challenged in recent years because all the focus is on UI and JavaScript, and they're the ones who really own the world. And we've been given a backseat inside the dark, deep database, and nobody cares about the database. And obviously, we need to care about the database because then your applications won't work like crap. But what I've always recommended is have a UX developer. It's fine. You might have a half dozen of them, and you probably only need one or two backend developers, and their job is to answer requests from the UI folks. Like, oh, I need a query to do X. Okay, here's a query. I need to insert into the table. Don't write an insert statement in JavaScript. Here's a procedure to do the insert. So a very tight collaboration that I think is also highly productive. So the UI folks stay focused on the UI and UX, and those backend developers can turn around requests really fast. So when this project we're working on and announcing next week, I've been playing that role. So I've been the backend PL SQL developer. And so I've been every day fielding requests from the UI developers. Can you please give me this? Your table function doesn't work right. And I can very quickly turn around these requests, and they can keep spinning along. It's a really great dynamic. Maybe we'll talk about it when we talk about how this project, I almost said it.
We definitely should. And Niels is actually asking, where will it be announced? So Niels, hopefully you follow Steven on Twitter, you follow Insimon's Twitter. It'll be you can't miss it. If you're on Twitter, we'll put it on our LinkedIn, on our Facebook.
Let's put it this way: it will be a major failure of us organizations if you don't hear about it. So it's actually a collaboration among 4 Apex companies. It's a unique new thing in a number of ways. So we're really excited. But let's move on. So I've got more small big talk I wanted to talk about, but yeah, enough of that. Okay.
How about leave it for the end? Yeah.
Yeah, I won't get into NFTs. I started a little Twitter dialogue about NFTs today.
Check it out.
Non-fungible tokens, is that right? Anyway,
Correct. Yeah.
ridiculous stuff. So let's talk about, this is the follow-up from 2 weeks ago. I talked about the function result cache, this really wonderful feature in the database that allows you to just add one keyword to a function, result cache, and then we'll automatically cache results every time the function is called and avoid calling the function if somebody previously called it with the same parameter values and just return the value instead. Major performance improvements are possible. It's also easy to abuse the feature. And that's what I want to focus on today, is ways that you can actually misuse the result cache that result in actually delivering dirty data to your users, which has got to be right at the bottom of the list of things database developers ever want to do. Now, before we dive into the code, I think what's really important is to remember the fundamental mechanics and principle of the function result cache. So basically, there's a pool of memory in the SGA that's set aside for the result cache. And every time, and within that result cache, it's segmented by each function or each query that has the result cache keyword or hint associated with it. And you can think of each one of those little sub caches as tables, really. And there's one index on that table, and the index is composed of every parameter in the parameter list. It's a unique index. And the content of the table is the return value. And that's really it. So the point is that the way the function result cache works is that the database looks at your parameter, your actual values passed to parameters to see if there's a match. If there's no match, it calls the function. If there is a match, it gets the value out. And then it invalidates the cache if any changes are made to underlying tables that it relies on. So that's the key thing. Parameter list is the key thing. So what you have to be thinking about then is, if I do something in my function that is not reflected in the parameter list, that could cause a problem. And that's what we're going to look at today. But I do want to emphasize that we're not talking about the fact that, so in a way, we're talking about side effects, right? There's something going on in the function that is not reflected in the parameter list. That's a common topic and concept related to deterministic functions. So deterministic functions are functions that the return value is entirely determined by the input values. You pass in the same argument values, you always get the same value back. That sounds like a result cache function, but the result cache function is a bit more broad in that Oracle's automatically validating and maintaining the cache. So even if your function has a side effect, which is a query against a table or tables, Oracle will take care of that for you. So that's not the kind of side effect we're looking at here. Instead, can you share my screen? We're going to look at some other kind of side effects. So we're going to run through a series of increasingly subtle, complex examples of how you can really screw things up with the result cache. And we're going to start with package variables. So I've created a package here called package, PKG, and it's got one variable, a package level variable, which essentially serves as a global in my session. Do I want to force uppercase or not? Then I have a function, last name, and the function takes an employee ID and returns the last name. Now, Thakar, I told you if I close the door, you have to sit here the whole time. I might have to relent and let him out. We'll see how bad the whining gets. So I get the last name for employee, and then, well, do I want it back uppercase or not? So I look at the value of my variable. If uppercase is true, then force the uppercase. Otherwise, just return the name. Fine, Falcor, fine. Moonbeam,
never work with dogs or children.
Moonbeam is just sitting down here, just resting patiently. Okay.
And that's mine. All right. It's dog chaos today.
So let's run this stuff and probably have to reconnect and whatever. Let's see. I did it pretty recently, but so as you can see, this is already a poorly designed function. Hopefully you would all agree this is not the way you want to do things. I've got an out of scope reference to this global variable that is not visible in the parameter list. But even if it's not a result cache function, we still don't want to do this. We don't want to have these hidden dependencies on package variables, especially as I think I've talked about before, that in a web environment, you don't necessarily have the same connection that you're making each time you do a server call, which means you could end up with a different session and a different PGA, which is where that value is cached. Okay, so I've created these elements. And then I'm going ahead and call my last name function for the first time. Because it's being called for the first time, it's going to run the body of the function, look up the name, and return it, just as we'd expect. Okay, then I'm going to change the value of my package variable, and I'm going to run the function again. Oh, and look, now it's uppercase, so it's recognizing the change in that value. Okay, and now let's set it back to false. Now, you might say, well, wait a minute, but wasn't the whole point of the result cache is that it wouldn't call the function again, and therefore it wouldn't do the uppercasing, even if I said to do the uppercasing? That's right, but this is not a result cache function. Ha ha, maybe I tricked you. So that's not a result cache function, which means it's invoked every time, which means I can change the package variable as much as I want, and it will reflect those changes. But now let's redefine the package, the function with result cache. So I recreate my function. And now because I recreated the function, the cache for that function is wiped clean. So I'm going to call it for the first time post compilation. And there's king, uppercase. I didn't want that. Didn't I set it back to? All right, let's do this. And then let's recreate my function once again to make sure. Okay, let's do that again. So now I'm going to call the function for the first time. There we go. So now it's mixed case. Then I'm going to set it to true and call it again. And now it's still lower mixed case and not uppercase. So that's the fundamental problem that you can run into with the result cache. I just returned bad data. I asked for it to be uppercased. It did not come back uppercased. And the fundamental reason that is the case is that inside my function, I reference this, and this value is not in the parameter list. So that's the basic problem, and we'll take a look at some other examples that are more subtle than this. But the bottom line, and so what is the solution to this scenario? The solution is either get rid of those kind of dependencies, and or what it really comes down to is move it up to the parameter list. So for example, what I could do here is say force uppercase. In Boolean, I could even say default false. And then I just change my function. Look at this instead of the package, which is the way it should have been from the beginning, right? I'm sure you'd agree. Like I say, this is not a subtle example. And then we're good, because now every time I call it, I'll call it with a value of true or false, and I'll end up essentially having two variations of that employee ID lookup. At most two variations, maybe just one. Okay, so that's a very simple example. Let's take a look at something a bit more subtle, and that has to do with session level settings. So every time I connect to my schema, connect to the database, I have a whole bunch of NLS and other settings for my session. For example, a format mask for a date. And if I make calls to a toChar function, for example, and I don't specify a mask, this is implicitly using my session level setting. And that means, well, what does that mean? Let's see. Okay, so let's create this table of big moments. What are the big moments in my life? By the way, these are not the big moments in my life. Not that this wasn't a big moment, but this has never happened in my life. But anyway, let's create this table, populate it. And notice I'm a little bit tricky with these dates. It's 0103 and 0301. So I just switch the month and the day. Okay, now I've got this function. I'm going to make it a result cache function. And I'm going to call it, I'm going to take the date and show what that date is as a string with an explicit conversion and an implicit conversion. And I'll do a lookup based on the explicit conversion. So I'll compile that. Now we can do this in two sessions. Right now I'm just running this stuff in one session, which makes it less interesting, but it doesn't really matter that much. Here, it'll matter for the next example. So I'm just going to stay in my Feuertips account. Then I've got this little initialization thing that will set my NLS date format. So I'll create that. Wow, all my code is compiling without any errors. Amazing. How did I manage that? And apologies to In Some Coding Standards, I didn't get rid of all my uppercase. It's my old code. All right, now I've created this reset cache, which basically updates the table, which says wipe out the cache for this table and therefore for the procedure. Okay, so what I'm going to do is initialize with a certain format, ask what happened, initialize with a different format, ask what happened again, what happened when. And what you see is, what's my big moment? I fetch the row. So the first time I executed, I fetch the row, and notice this is my explicit conversion, which matches this. This is my implicit conversion, which matches the other date. But since I did an explicit lookup, I get my first hole in one. And then the second time I call it, notice that even if I change the format mask, my value is still the same. So again, because I had already called the function with this date value, the code is not actually executed, but inside the function, I have a reference to toChar that's not qualified with the mask, and then it leads to problems. In fact, let's do this again, but let's get rid of the format, the explicit conversion. Recompile my function. I'm hearing some background noise.
Oh, that might be me. I'll mute.
And now let's run it again. Now notice I'm getting got married, because now it's changed what that lookup is doing, and now it's relying on the session state instead. So essentially, what you need to do is think about any kind of session level dependencies inside your function. Things like toChar, things like if you're dealing with currency and the characters that you use to indicate the decimal and the separators. All of those things can have an impact on your code. One final one, and then we have a quiet day so far. Is that right?
No, well, Plamen is giving us a hint that his birthday is either January 3rd or March 1st. We'll have to guess which one that is.
Or October 11th. But you're right, it's 11/13, so probably that. Okay, and here's a question from Jamal. Can you stop sharing for a second? I'll take a look at that. If there's a DML operation on the view, would there be any issues using the function result cache used in the view? So I have a view, And the view calls a result cache function as a part of the view, where the function is used in. So Jamal, I'm not exactly sure if the function is using the view or the view is calling the function. DML operation on the view basically is a DML operation on a table. So when you invalidate the cache so if you do a DML operation on the view, it modifies the table. It invalidates the cache in your session for that function. And then the question, I think, is if you're calling the function inside the view. I'm not exactly sure right offhand, but I assume that view is calling the function. Yeah, so the view calls the function and the function calls the view? Or you're doing, no, so you're doing an insert, but if the function is calling the view, you can't do a direct insert on that view, right? It would have to be an instead of trigger. I'm not exactly sure. So you can keep writing in comments to maybe clarify that, Jamal, but the bottom line is that a function that references the view is really the same thing as referencing the underlying tables. Oracle will automatically sort all of that for you. Okay, so Jamal, keep the comments or clarifications coming along. Let's go back and take a look at my last, most complex example. Share my screen, please. Okay, and this has to do with a really cool feature called virtual private database or fine-grained access control or row-level security. Take your pick. So VPD is virtual private database. And the basic idea behind virtual private database is that you can assign security policies on your table that restrict which rows can be viewed by the user. Classic example. Let's suppose in the United States, eventually maybe we have national health care, Medicare for everybody. We won't get into the debates about rights and wrongs, but suppose it happened. Then there'd be a single patient's table in an obviously Oracle database for the entire country. And everybody can select from patients because we're all patients. But if I am a patient and I select star from patients, I should only be able to see me. And if you're my doctor and you write select star from patients, you should only be able to see your patients and you. And if let's say you're a state regulator and you say select star from patients, you should be able to see all the patients within your state. And that kind of control and restriction of data, obviously that's very sensitive data, that kind of thing can be done with virtual private database at a very deep level in the database. So I'm going to run through the basics of this operation and show you the kind of issue you can run into with combining that with result cache. So I have a function that has a package that has a function called last name, pass in the ID, get the last name. I have a function called restrict employees, which is my policy. And then, so my last name is a result cache function. We don't need this anymore, Stephen. This is really old code. Wow. This is back in 11G when we actually had to tell the database what tables my function relied on. Boom. Okay, so then I look up the row of data, pass it back. Cool, just typical lookup, perfectly good approach for result cache, right? If I pass in the employee ID more than once, it's going to be the same employee information, get the same name, unless the table is changed and the cache is invalidated. That's all good. But again, this is the employees table, let's say the patients table. I need to very carefully restrict what rows you're allowed to see. Even if you pass in the employee ID, maybe you shouldn't be able to see that employee. So here's my policy. This is a very, very dumb little policy. And the policy says, look, if you're invoking this, you're running the function as Feuerstein, you can see anything. Anybody else tries to run it? No way, can't see anything at all. Now, obviously, security policies are generally a bit more subtle than this. Usually they have calls to syscontext to get session context values so that when you log in, there's an on-login trigger that runs that sets up the values based on who you are, and that permeates through your application through VPD. Very powerful process. Okay, so that's my rule.
Stephen, I just wanted to mention, actually, Anton and I did a session on instant tips that covered some VPD stuff. So we'll pop in a link in the description of the video after.
Excellent. Yeah, great idea. Great. Right. Now you might say, well, what is this 1 = 1 and 1 = 2? Well, what actually happens is that when I define the policy, here's the definition of the policy. I'm saying add a policy to this table. It's going to be for these different SQL operations, call this function. And what's really going to happen is that when I say select star from employees, Oracle's going to recognize there's a policy. It's going to wake up and call the function call the policy function, return the string, and append that as a where clause predicate. So instead of saying where employee ID equals 17, it'll say where employee ID equals 17 and 1 equals 1 or 1 equals 2. This is hidden below the view of the user. They cannot interfere with this process, which makes it highly secure and hard to get around. So let's see, let's create the policy. Oh, did I create any of this? Let's create the package spec, package body. Let's create the policy. Okay.
While you're doing that, Ashish, you're asking for a recap. Everything will get, this whole show gets accompanied by a blog post. And of course, you could rewatch the video after the show.
Yeah, can't do a recap now, but you can get recapped later. Okay, so I'm connected as Feuerstein. I run my query, and I see a row. I go over to Feuerstein2, and I say, are you still there? And it says, sorry, we have to reconnect. So now I'm going to sit for a little bit while it establishes a new connection, I'm pretty sure. And let's see, we have another comment from Jamal. So let's take a look at that. If you could stop sharing my screen. Oh, they probably don't mind looking at infinity. And can you share that last comment by Jamal? No, all the way
I think that it was sort of a response to still your earlier comments, the earlier question about the view calling the function.
The function queries another table for validation or security, sure. And of course, the function is not part of the values in the insert statement on the view. Yeah, Jamal, honestly, my head's getting a little bit confused about all the different aspects of it. What would be good, it sounds very interesting, is if you could write up a little sequence of code and send it to me or put it in live SQL for us to check out. I will definitely take a look at it, and maybe we'll pick it up at on the next session. All right, let's see, am I back? Yes, I'm back. Okay, so if you could share my screen again. I'm now in Feuerstein2. So let's see. Here's my query against Feuerstein. Let's see, make sure I ran the grant. I'm not sure I did this time. So grant select, grant execute. Okay, so now from this schema, I'm going to query from the employees table. And notice, no data. This is correct. This is VPD at work. What it really did was this. You're never going to get any rows. So that's VPD at work. Very cool feature, right? I got it here. I saw my row here, but I didn't see it here. Okay, so that's perfect. Now let's take a look at the function result cache. So that was a result cache function, right? Result cache function. So now what I'm going to do is use the function, and I'm going to say, look up the person for 198, O'Connell. So I run this code, and it shows me O'Connell. Cool. But here's the really awful part, or the scary part. I'm going to call the same function from the other schema. And I should not see O'Connell, right? I'm looking up 198, and we said, no, Stephen, you can't have that. Well, it turns out, what's the problem here? Oh, silly me. Turns out I can see bad data. Yay! So I completely violated all of my security policies, which I so carefully created and were so important to the application. Boom, blasted apart by careless use of the function result cache. All right, well, there you go. So I guess the answer is you should never use the function result cache with VPD policies, right? Well, it's probably something you want. Well, it's definitely something you want to be very careful about, but it doesn't mean you don't use it. It means you have to apply the same rule that you applied before, which is everything has to be in the parameter list. So the solution to this situation, let's take a look. Here's my package. Here's my last name function. Here's my policy function. Notice this is not a result cache function. It used to be, but it's not anymore. So you're like, oh, really? So I can't use result cache? Wait for it. Now let's look inside my package body. Turns out I have two last name functions. Only one of them is public. The public one calls the private one. The private one has an additional parameter. So in other words, I looked in my VPD policy and looked for all the dependencies, just like a toChar without an explicit mask is a session level dependency that I needed to move up to my parameter list by passing in the mask or passing in the package variable, etc. In this case, I have to look at all my dependencies in my policy. In this case, very simple, the user. So what I've done here is move the user up to the parameter list, but I've hidden it away. So from the public usage perspective, you just pass in the employee ID. Behind the scenes, I add the user. So now my index consists of these two values. It is a valid unique index by user, by employee ID, and now I will not get dirty data anymore. However, think about it. So that's the overall solution. Identify all the dependencies in your VPD policy, push them up to the parameter list, and you're good. But you always, when you go through this process, you always have to ask yourself, does it still make sense to use the function result cache? Because what I'm doing here is similar to what happens if you try to use the function result cache with auth ID, current user, or invoker rights. You're essentially partitioning your cache, not only by the employee ID, but by those other parameters you're putting in. So the question becomes, how many times will this unique combination be hit? So previously, without the VPD, every time anybody across the entire instance looked up the employee ID 198, you save some time. Now it's got to be every time I look up employee 198, not everybody across the database. So in this particular policy situation, I lose the cross-session applicability of the cache, which is one of its major features. And probably in general with VPD, you're going to lose that kind of cross-session applicability because most of your context will be about you individually and what it means for you to access data. So bottom line, you can go ahead and stop sharing my screen. So the bottom line is that function result cache, fantastic feature. It's so simple to add the single keyword and get enormous benefits. You have to watch out for latch contention. If people are hammering a lot of data into the cache, building it up, that's going to slow down and possibly cripple your application. But the biggest thing is you have to be very careful about the functions you apply result cache to make sure you don't inadvertently create problems for your users and deliver bad data. And it can be relatively obvious. It can be quite subtle. The same VPD problem would happen if you are using context instead of function parameters. Well, I'm not sure what you mean by that one, Jamal, in the sense that almost any serious production VPD, real-world VPD policy is going to have syscontext calls in it. There's nothing wrong with that. The question is, what syscontext values are you looking up? And then you see how you can move those up to the parameter list. It may be that in some situations you can't push it up to the parameter list, in which case you say, well, let's see, what's more important, VPD or result cache? And the answer will almost always be, I assume, VPD, because that's correctness, not performance. Correctness of business rules, correctness of data always takes priority over the fun stuff, performance. And Hemant, if you use syscontext as well. So I'm not sure if that's a different comment from Jamal's or not. So you obviously need to use.
I think Hemant was probably responding to Jamal. They came in sort of one after the other. So.
Okay, so I think that covers it. Explicit using syscontext. Is that to get the username? You can certainly get the current user through syscontext. Yeah. Again, whatever your references to syscontext are, figure out how to move them up to the parameter list, or decide, you know what, maybe we shouldn't use result cache in this case. So, all right.
Hemant's clarifying that his comment was about the result cache partitioning.
Right. And that's the way to think about it, right? It'll be partitioned. Okay, so that's a half hour. Thanks for sticking with me. So what we're going to do now is keep the comments, questions, ideas coming. We're going to switch over to a favorite book, a few different organizations. Michelle, you're going to pick which person should pick the organization that we're going to donate money to help heal our planet today.
I would, Plamen, if you're still around, if you can pick an organization.
A little birthday present for Plamen?
There you go. An early birthday present, late birthday present.
All right, please share my screen.
Are you ready to share? All right.
So my book of choice for today, my favorite book, is called Fatherland by Robert Harris. Robert Harris is a great writer. This was, I believe, his first book. He's since written many of them. And partly it's something I was attracted to because I was raised in a fairly typical middle-class Jewish family on Long Island. So anything having to do with Nazis and World War II has a special intriguing interest to us. But But what's really great about this book is also it fits my formula for my favorite kind of book. I'm very old-fashioned. I never read books online. I don't watch videos hardly ever anyway. I can't tolerate doing it. And I don't like fancy books with all different formats, like a story in which somebody tells a story, a book that has diary entries in different format. I just like you to tell me a story. And the best kind of story is the one that's told from a first person perspective. In other words, I am watching that person experience things and they have to figure out what to do. And I figure out along with them. And I don't see anything but what they see. I love the kind of discipline involved in that. That's what Fatherland is. And it's just fantastic, powerful, moving book. So check it out. And then you might explore many of his others. Okay, so we continue to focus on here at InSum, healing the planet in terms of things we do individually and as an organization. And also we donate money each month, each week, or each bi-week now to organizations that do help heal the planet. My 3 organizations this week, I've referenced them before, is Wild Earth Guardians, folks who are working on legal defenses of our planet. Oceana, helping to restore and clean the planet before we all go down hard and fast. And one thing, by the way, about oceans right now, besides all the other stuff we know about, the plastic, the acidification, the heating, one of the last frontiers for companies to mine our planet for natural resources is the bottom of the oceans. And there are enormous scraping machines right now scraping the bottom of our oceans to grab minerals and other resources and suck them up through hundreds of feet, or I don't know how many, anyway, of piping. Really, really awful stuff, incredibly destructive. And it just so should stop. So Oceana, and kind of related, Save the Whales, one of a number of organizations that work to save the largest mammals, or the largest animals, right? The blue whales, the largest, or maybe the sperm whales. Anyway, the largest animals that have ever existed on our planet. To think that they might go extinct while we're living, oh my God, too painful. So, Plowman, take your pick of those 3, and you can stop sharing my screen. And just a final comment, if you want to check me out on Twitter, I just had a little thread with Shyam about NFTs, non-fungible tokens, in which people have been paying enormous sums of money to get digital rights, exclusive digital rights to like something that anybody can see digitally or not anyway. And then you get into cyber currency to support it. It's madness. Truly, humans are going mad. We are in code red. Our planet is destabilizing, largely not due to humans, but largely due to technology and science that enables us to do the things we're doing to our planet. And we've got to stop having our little love affair with anything we can do, we should do, and have fun with it. So say no to NFTs, say no to a lot of that nonsense, and go outside, be outside. Thank you, Plowman. So Oceana, we will help heal our planet, help heal our oceans. All right, I guess that's enough of a soapbox for today. But so my final thing is, don't go outside, be outside. Put your stuff down. Like right after this webinar, if you can, just close down your laptop, go outside and actually just be there and look around and get close to your planet. And anything you look at will be amazing and wonderful. You will be energized. Then go back and do some coding. Thank you so much. See you in a couple of weeks.
See you. Thanks. Bye.